Hey everyone, it's Kothis. There are so many new things happening with Lightfall that I just wanted to make a video going over some of the big changes that will be happening to builds, mods, subclasses, and even more. So many other great things are also launching with Lightfall and beyond, but this video is going to focus more on things that will have to do with the stuff mentioned already, so let's get right into it. Let's start with all things builds and mod related. There's a lot to cover here and it's all really good. Armor Charge is going to be the new way that we create builds. Gone will be the days of elemental wells, charged with light, and warmind cells. Yep, they're being completely axed in favor of Armor Charge, which kind of unifies both elemental wells and charged with light since they have so much synergy already. So what's happening here? Well, the Armor Charge mechanic kind of works like charged with light right now, except we'll be able to hold 3 stacks of Armor Charge by default, with certain mods able to take us up to 6 stacks. Armor Charge will also decay over time, every 10 seconds to be exact, so no more holding onto your charge with light stacks for as long as you want. There will be a mod that kind of helps with that decay timer, but this really will shake up our current builds. My Arc Titan, for example, kind of relies on being charged with light in between encounters, especially in Grandmasters, and also unlike charged with light, this new system seems to have a tiered system for mod power, so certain mods will consume more than 1 armor charge. Some might consume 3. So I'd expect there to be a bit of tuning to the current mods that we have now, since everything right now consumes 1 charge with light stack. Anyway, I am really curious to see this in action. There will also be different ways to gain armor charge stacks. Some mods that give us charged with light now will kind of evolve into the armor charge mods, and I'm sure we'll get plenty of new ones as well. And speaking of mods, lots of stuff changing here too. First, all mods will be available to everyone once they hit Guardian rank 6. And yes, I know a lot of mods are available to everyone right now, but a lot of these mods will be sunset for all of the new mods that will be released. So what are Guardian ranks, you ask? It seems like this is going to be an overall Destiny mastery rank system, which I'll admit I'm pretty hyped for. According to Bungie, Guardian rank 6 should be pretty attainable to most players relatively easily. Hopefully we find out more about Guardian ranks in the coming weeks, maybe in a TWAB or something, because I'm very interested. The thing I'm probably most hyped for with mods is the removal of affinity types. You know those times when you've got the perfect build, but you've got to change that arc helmet to solar since you need to use ashes to assets, since ashes to assets is only solar, only to realize after you converted it to solar that you were actually using it in another build and you needed it to be arc. Yeah, this is just not a good system. So with Lightfall, all armor mods will no longer be gated by which affinity you have on that armor piece, since they'll be gone entirely. This means that you can mix and match tons of armor mods that couldn't be mix and matched before. For instance, we will now be able to use the currently void focusing strike and solar impact induction at the same time on our arms. Many more examples, this is just one, and to help make this even better, many of the mods that will be evolving into the armor charge system will be reduced in cost. The amount of times I've needed 11 energy on a piece of armor to make the perfect setup. Yeah, it's been a lot. Thankfully, this should happen a lot less. The artifact is also getting a very nice overhaul. All of these mods are now converting to passive perks. Yeah, this is going to be insane. No more wasting 7 energy for something like Unstoppable Grenade Launcher. It'll just be there all the time once you unlock it. The only holdup here is that you'll only be able to pick 12 at a time, so you won't be able to unlock the full artifact at all times. Otherwise, that probably would be way too powerful. But you can reset it for free as many times as you want, anytime you want. I really love this. Something else new with mods is that we should be spending quite a bit less time tinkering with our mods, making sure we've got the correct loader mods and all that. Instead, they are swapping all of these mods to damage type mods. This is going to make it great, especially with the monochromatic loadout direction that Bungie is pushing us in. So if you're running a really cool Void loadout, for example, you can just apply the Void Weapon Loader mod, and now all of your Void weapons reload quicker. Love it. Finishing up this section, we will quickly go over the loadouts feature. Finally, an in-game space where we can save loadouts and apply them instantly without having to rely on an external source like Dim. Dim is amazing, don't get me wrong, and I believe at the start it will still have more customization, but this is going to be so good. You can see here that it's all done on one screen. We can save everything with a custom icon, name, and up to 10 of them. They did say that loadout slots will be unlockable as we progress through Guardian ranks though, so keep that in mind. A lot of people probably won't be starting off at 10 loadouts. But honestly, that's a good idea in my opinion. A brand new player feeling like they have to have 10 loadouts for every character could make it overwhelming, so starting off with a nice 3 might be a good idea. but that's just my opinion. You can even see that we can set our weapon mods up along with the traits we want. And yes, you can set it to save specific trait choices for specific loadouts. That way you can have a PvP and a PvE setup or something like that. I know I sound like a broken record, but man, all this stuff is just so good. I'm so excited. With Lightfall, we'll now have the ability to intrinsically deal with champions right from within our subclass. Higher end content will not necessarily be easier since we've got some nerfs coming, but I'll get to that in a second. But the level of options we'll have to deal with champions is about to skyrocket. For all barrier champions, shooting them with void volatile rounds or while just being radiant through the help of solar will lower their shield and will stun them. There will also be a strand way to deal with them, but we're just not sure how that works yet. For overload champions, utilizing the arc jolt, void suppression, or the slow effect from stasis will stun them. And finally, for unstoppables, you've got solar ignitions, stasis freeze and shatter, arc blind, and some form of strand as well. All of these just make so much sense. It makes you wonder why it hasn't been this way already, but it really does add to all the subclass verbs that we've been getting used to over the past year. And of course, this does not only apply to your subclass. Many weapons with perks like incandescent, volt shot, and chill clip can totally work here as well. So these perks basically just got a massive buff. The light subclasses are also getting a bit more work done on them as well. New fragments, updated fragments, and even new subclass specific objects. So we'll start with Arc. It gets a few new fragments, Spark of Instinct and Spark of Haste. Instinct is going to give us a reverse jolt effect while we're critically wounded, doing AoE arc jolt damage as we take damage. Haste will raise our resilience, recovery, and mobility while sprinting. These both seem really strong. For Solar, we have 2 brand new fragments and 3 that will be getting updated, and the new Fire Sprite object. We haven't seen Fire Sprites in action yet, but apparently they should function similarly to Arc's Ionic Traces. By default, Fire Sprites will restore grenade energy when picked up, but can do way more when paired with all these new fragments. Let's talk about those really quick. Ember of Mercy will grant restoration to you and allies after a revive, and also when you pick up a Fire Sprite. Ember of Resolve will cure you on any grenade kill. Ember of Tempering will keep its current effects, but will also spawn a Fire Sprite for every weapon kill while active. Ember of Combustion keeps its original effects, but now also spawns in Fire Sprites on super kills. And the one I think everyone is going to use still is Ember of Searing. It creates a Fire Sprite on scorch kills. Callous Mini Tool buff, Incandescent buff, this is going to be so strong. Void is getting similar treatment to Solar as well, with the start of a new object, Void Breaches. Picking these up by default will grant class ability energy, but like Fire Sprites, they can do way more with these fragments. Echo of Cessation sounds like a really fun one. Finishing enemies will create a Void Explosion that will make surrounding enemies volatile, and will also spawn in a Void Breach. Echo of Vigilance will grant you an overshield on kills while you're critically wounded. Pairing this with Repulsor Brace sounds really nice. Echo of Domineering keeps all of its original effects, but now also spawns a Void Breach on suppressed enemy kills. Echo of Harvest will spawn a Void Breach when precision killing weakened targets. That might be a bit too specific for me, but we'll wait and see. And the big one, Echo of Starvation, a new way to get Devour. All you have to do is pick up a Void Breach and you get Devour. This is going to be very, very strong. So that was some fragment stuff. Let's talk about some other things too. Titan Bubbles in PvP will now take a lot less damage to kill, with their health dropping from 13,500 to 8,000. Armor of Light is also getting a pretty giant nerf, with your health dropping from 400 to 325. We all knew this is coming. Iron Banner this season has just been terrible with all the bubbles around. It should be a lot more manageable now. Thunder Crash also getting nerfed a bit, mainly noticeable in PvP with the impact radius being reduced and the fly time being reduced. However, Daybreak is getting a buff, finally, with PvE damage increasing by 25%. Phoenix Dive also is being brought up in power a bit to help it compete with the Healing Rift and Empowering Rift. Basically, less cooldown time and a lot more potency. And as for a few stats, they are getting a nerf as well. It became far too easy to ability spam, so now Discipline, Strength, and Class ability stats cooldowns are essentially being raised by 20%. Alright, let's cover Strand really quick. If you don't want any spoilers, just skip ahead to the next section. But Strand has keyword verbs just like all the other subclasses, so let's go over those real quick. The 3 debuff verbs we'll have access to are Suspend, Unravel, and Sever. Suspend does exactly what you think it would do. While an enemy is suspended, they are completely disabled in PvE. In PvP though, thankfully, from the way they describe it, it sounds like the effect that you'll get when you're tethered with a Hunter Super. Slow movement, but you're still able to shoot. Unraveling seems kind of similar to Jolt, but incredibly powerful, and it's a bit different. Shooting an unraveled target will cause threads to burst out from the target and kind of seek out and travel to other targets. And any other target it hits, those targets will also start to unravel. This seems pretty nice. And finally, Sever will reduce enemy damage output. We'll also be getting a buff called Woven Mail, which will basically summon Strand Matter armor, reducing our damage intake even further. However, in PvP, headshots will still do the same damage, body shots will be reduced, but this still seems very strong. We have a few other descriptors to go over here to kind of help us better understand Strand. Weaving is a term used for creating any object with Strand. Unraveling is that debuff that we'll do when we do damage and defeat enemies with Strand. And tangles are what is left over after an enemy is killed while unraveled. These tangles are going to kind of be like green orbs that we can shoot to do nice AoE Strand damage, or we can pick them up and throw them to do damage from range. Yep, this is the Warmind Cell replacement for sure. I gotta say, all of this terminology is pretty epic. I'm liking this. Okay, let's cover Threadlings next. These will be our new green dimensional explosive worm buddies that will fight for us. Warlocks can utilize them best, but every class will have access to them through the Threadling Grenade and a few fragments. Threadlings will basically seek out enemies and explode on them. So for grenades, we've obviously got the Threadling Grenade, which will send out Threadlings. The Shackle Grenade will suspend enemies and seek out other enemies. And finally, we have the Grappling Hook. Hunters will definitely utilize this best, but all classes have the ability to use it. Now that we have a good grasp of the basics, let's start covering the classes. And all classes, just as an FYI, will have 2 aspects to start off, with more being added over the year, kind of like Stasis. Broodweaver Warlocks, as mentioned, will be the Threadling Masters. They'll be able to summon them, send them to enemies, and recall unused ones. When recalled, they will perch on the Warlock, I'm assuming as a buff that you can see on your screen, so you can send them off again when you need to. Warlocks will have 3 melee charges for the first time ever. These are known as Arcane Darts. The first aspect is Weaver's Call, which will weave 3 Threadlings when you use your Rift ability, and any extra Threadlings are stored as eggs. I don't know, I kind of gotta see this first. Mindspun Invocation is the second aspect, which will improve a lot of your abilities. Grappling on its own will summon 3 Threadlings. Consuming your Threadling Grenade will give you max Threadlings that will perch until you summon them. And consuming your Shackle Grenade will send out an AoE suspend on every kill. Pretty insane. And the Needle Storm Super will summon and launch needles at enemies, detonate, and reweave themselves into Threadlings and attack more enemies. What? Moving on to the Threadrunner Hunter, the masters of mobility and the grapple. The first aspect, Ensnaring Slam, will kind of feel like Shatter Dive, but will instead suspend enemies surrounding you. Widow's Silk is the next aspect that will take the grappling hook to the next level for hunters and your fire teams. Connecting to a grapple point will basically refund your grapple ability, so you can set up chains of grapple points for you and your fire team. The melee, Threaded Spike, is a very unique melee, probably the most unique in the game. It's got a mini game associated to it. You'll kind of send out your rope dart, and as it hits enemies, it will start refunding melee energy, and pressing the melee button at the right time when it's on its way back to you will refund more. This is just really well thought out, I don't know. The super, Silk Strike, also seems very interesting. Basically, much faster grappling, a light and heavy attack, and explosions on kills. And you can do all of this while airborne if you want to. And finishing up with the Titan, similar to the Warlock, we've got 3 melee charges which can be comboed if done correctly. Frenzied Blade is the name of the melee ability and will summon giant blade arms that can lunge at enemies while striking. Into the Fray is our first aspect, and it will automatically grant Woven Mail to us and allies anytime we destroy a tangle. Melee regeneration is also increased while Woven Mail is active. Dranger's Lash, the next aspect, will blast forward Strand energy in a shockwave, suspending any enemies caught in its way. Blade Fury is our super ability that kind of blends melee and ranged attacks, thankfully. Hitting 3 light attacks in a row will max out the attack speed and will also help charge up the heavy attack. The heavy attack will send ranged Strand projectiles out that will suspend and damage enemies. Before this article came out, I was kind of expecting this to just be your standard Titan melee super, but it kind of seems a bit more thought out, which I definitely like. And finishing up the Strand section, we only have 4 fragments that have been revealed so far, with more being shown later on. Thread of Ascent. Activating your grenade ability reloads your current weapon and grants increased weapon handling and airborne effectiveness for a short time. Thread of Fury. Damaging targets with a tangle grants melee energy. Thread of Finality. Finishers grant threadlings. Thread of Warding. Picking up an orb of power grants woven mail. Man, I can't wait to see what these other fragments look like. Strand is looking pretty legit. And that is just about everything that we know about Strand so far. Now let's move on to some weapons changes. First thing, kind of having to do with weapons, is that the match game modifier that is in almost every activity legend and higher will be gone. No more having to load in with all damage types across your whole fire team. With the way builds have been improving, it was becoming very counterintuitive to have all different damage types. For example, if I create a Solar Scorch build that I really like, but the Grandmaster Nightfall has mainly Arc and Void shields, it really handicaps the solar subclass's usage since I'm not able to take in solar weapons that can improve scorching, igniting, and so on. It really has limited the endgame content to a few like hyper-specific builds that are just objectively less fun to play in my opinion. I really like this change. Kinetic weapons are also moving in the direction of getting their own damage type. More perks will be added later this year for it. We're not really sure what it does yet, but it does finally look like it's moving up in power close to where the other damage types are. Kinetics are also getting an increased damage buff to unshielded targets as well. Currently they do 5% additional damage, but that wasn't enough, so they are going to end up doing 15% additional damage, which is a really nice change. Stasis weapons, even though they are in the kinetic slot, they will be losing that 5% buff altogether to kind of keep them in line with other energy weapons. Moving on, we will be seeing some changes to the way certain exotics interact with the subclass keywords as well. More are being added, which I really like. And keep in mind, these keywords now are intrinsically anti-champion as well. So let's rapid fire these really quick. The Queenbreaker will chain blind to nearby enemies. Ruinous Effigy, if you slam the orb down, now it will suppress enemies. Leviathan's Breath will now create volatile rounds on the perfect draw, and it's also getting a nice damage increase. 1000 Voices will be getting Scorch. If a full shot of 1k lands on an enemy, it will automatically ignite. Sunshot Explosions now will trigger Scorch. Polaris Lance, that perfect 5th shot, will now create Scorch. Prometheus Lens will now get incandescent with the catalyst. Wow. Grand Overture is now getting the Arc Blind for better synergy with Arc. So those are some new things coming with Lightfall. I know that was kind of a long video and there definitely is more, but these changes here should really prove to add a lot of customization to all of our builds and really just make everything better. If you still have more questions on all this stuff, definitely join the Discord. I always mention it, but the link is right in the description. All right, everyone, curious to see what you think about Strand, but that is it for this one. I will see you all in the next video.